Good evening, Manhattan, New York City, the world, the universe, and beyond. My name is Kirk Kerber, and we're going to talk about some deep trance. We're going to talk about some trauma and how to walk you out of the trauma. And we're going to have a spiritual, supernatural, mystical, and magical TV show. My name's Kirk Kerber, and I'll be your host for the next half hour. Good evening, Manhattan, New York City, the world, the universe, and beyond. My name is Kirk Kerber. I'm sitting here in Studio 4. We are in our 16th year of spiritual, supernatural, mystical, and magical, metaphysical, spiritual programming. In the last couple months, we have been focusing on trauma, trance, metaphysics as it relates to hypnosis, and therapeutic hypnosis and hypnotic trance. And I'm studying to get certified in therapeutic hypnosis with an eye on walking my clients out of trauma. So it's spring into summer 2019. And as I said, my name is Kirk Kerber. I help people, and I've been assisting individuals step into their highest power and highest evolvement self, divine self, for the past 25 years. And I've been doing this TV show for the past 16 years. If you want to know more than that, just head on over to Kirk Spiritual, like it says on your screen, and it's my website. There's also over 200, maybe even 300 hours of full video, supernatural, mystical, magical, metaphysical, spiritual, supernatural, and deep trance hypnosis content online, all free for love for you to check out. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, tell me your metaphysical life story, which a lot of people do, you can contact me at kirktv@gmail.com. So, what are we going to be talking about tonight, Kirk? Oh, let's just take a deep yoga breath right now, get into your body and prepare to be relaxed. So, I'm studying hypnosis, I'm studying therapeutic hypnosis, and even rogue hypnosis from a guy named Anthony Jacquin, who's over in the UK, as well as different forms of hypnosis. So I will be able to specialize in walking my clients out of PTSD and minimizing something called compounded PTSD. And I myself was diagnosed with PTSD about 2 years ago. So it's a labor of love, and it's very interesting, and I know what the symptoms are, and I'd like to merge my personal and professional and all the other universes that are merging over here and help future clients to stabilize and minimize the effects of trauma and then compounded PTSD trauma as well. So, having said all that, what are we going to do? We're going to, first of all, let's talk about and get you a basic idea of what trauma is. So, this is from a guy named Scott Musgrave, and this is probably the finest, most easily to understand, well-produced, short video on understanding trauma that I think I've ever found. And this is my second or third time showing it on the show, and I want to show it to you again. I don't think this video could be out there enough right now, and I really do believe the therapist of the future, be they spiritual, supernatural, shamanic in my case, or hypnotherapeutic, is going to have some kind of savvy and healing arts wisdom, healing arts energy and arsenal toolkit with specific regards to trauma, healing trauma, and assisting their clients with traumas. So let's find out what it is and what it is not. You can find this on the YouTube right now under Associative Awareness Technique, which I don't really know what that is, but let's just see what Scott has to say.
My name is Scott Musgrave. I'm a physical therapist, chronic pain and human performance specialist, and I've created this video especially for anyone who continues to suffer from a chronic condition like anxiety, depression, chronic pain, or post-traumatic stress, so that you can better understand what's really going on. Now, understanding how your brain reacts to trauma, well, it turns out is the key to understanding how trauma impacts your body. So the first thing we need to do is really define trauma. What is trauma? You know, the real definition of this may just surprise you. Okay, listen, we can all agree that getting into a car accident or breaking an arm or a leg, these certainly constitute traumatic experiences in life. But that really only tells part of the story. The key to defining trauma lies within every one of us, in something we all share in common. And that something is our survival instincts. So how do our instincts define trauma? Well, our instincts of survival ultimately define trauma regardless of what we think about the event itself. See, it's a chemical thing. There are certain parts of the brain that live beneath or outside of your conscious awareness, and they react to these life events. And when they produce the chemistry of trauma, your body is pushed into a traumatic reaction. That's what we're here to learn about. So here's a new definition of trauma that's championed by renowned neurologist, traumatologist, author, and international speaker Robert Scare. And that is that trauma is defined as any negative life event that occurs in a position of relative helplessness. Think about that statement for a moment. Relative helplessness. So when the human brain experiences trauma or any negative event in a relative state of helplessness, an instinctive process of protection is engaged. And it turns out that the key to understanding trauma is finding out how the human brain responds to helplessness and how this helplessness engages these natural instincts of survival and what those natural instincts of survival do to your body. So this is how it works. When your brain experiences any event with a combined negative consequence and a relative state of helplessness to that event itself, then instinctive neurochemistry turns on the survival strategies of fight and flight reactions, which are then sent throughout the body. And these fight and flight instinctive reactions of protection serve to help us survive the event, which was ultimately perceived as a potentially life-threatening situation by our brain. So we can all see the benefit of having an instinctive or automatic part of our brain constantly assessing for any life-threatening situation and ready to take action in the event that we experience something like that. But the trouble with trauma is that the human brain has a way of learning to associate many things, even safe things, later on with the actual trauma long ago, and then can re-engage the neurochemical processes of protection over and over and over, often long after, years after, the actual threat has been extinguished. In point of fact, it's important to understand that this happens to all of us all the time, consistent with the basic form and function of the human brain. Now, most of our habits, they're actually formed in exactly the same way. And I want to go through some of the habits of trauma with you, because I think you'll find that many of you have commonalities of symptom patterns or presentations within this grouping of habits. So the habits of trauma include chronic pain, depression, anxiety, fear, tension, anger, post-traumatic stress, dependency, and learned helplessness. Now these interrelated habits, well, they're common patterns that are associated with trauma. They're also common patterns when we're dealing with chronic conditions. And the habits of trauma, well, generally they lead to patterns that have dramatic physiological impact in our bodies and ultimately dictate our very own quality of life. The travesty for most trauma survivors is that the neurochemistry of helplessness is re-engaged so often that maintaining a state of fight and flight becomes a habit. And this results in a myriad of chronic conditions emerging, each having its own doctor, its own medicines, and its own empty promises. So to make matters worse, most of the reactions that have resulted in these habits, well, they were actually false alarms. So now we can understand how the brain responds to trauma, but what does that have to do with how the body reacts to trauma? Okay, listen, the part of your brain that controls all of your survival instincts, see, that's called your autonomic or automatic nervous system, it also controls every system in your body, including your nervous system, cardiac system, digestive system, circulatory system, respiratory system, reproductive system, your excretory system, your muscular system, your skeletal system, your endocrine system or hormone balance, your immune system, and your integumentary system. Take a look at that list. Chances are your symptom patterns are included. But this autonomic nervous system, it also micromanages the interrelationships of all of these systems, the tissues and organs that comprise these systems, and how these systems work together to sustain your life. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no breaks. So when the autonomic nervous system engages the survival instincts of fight and flight, every single system in the body receives instructions to be prepared for critical action. Now, interestingly, if you're able to evade the real or perceived threat that initiated this traumatic response in your brain, then your autonomic nervous system turns off the survival instincts of fight and flight. And this allows your body, your physiology, to return to balance or homeostasis. That's the place where true healing can really occur. But what happens when you can't or don't escape that threat? Then your brain or your autonomic nervous system becomes frozen in a state of fight and flight, still considering the trauma to be an active threat to your survival. And when your autonomic nervous system freezes in the state of instinctively driven protection, fight and flight, kind of just like this iceberg, the real problems are much more than you can see above the surface. The real problems live underneath the surface, inside every single system within your body. Now, when you're frozen in a fight and flight instinctive pattern of protection, your brain drives your body hard at full speed, kind of like this race car. Thing about that is, our body isn't really built to sustain that over the long haul. So, over time, as expected, your body starts to break down. And this results in chronic conditions that show up in multiple systems within your body. Look again at this graphic of the habits associated with trauma: chronic pain, depression, anxiety, fear, tension, anger, post-traumatic stress, dependency, and learned helplessness. Okay? And these can become habituated within your brain, your body, and your very life. Now, the habits of trauma, they generally lead to patterns that have dramatic physiological impact in your bodies, and they ultimately dictate your quality of life. And the list of chronic conditions that result from the autonomic nervous system becoming frozen in a state of instinctively driven fight and flight protection, consequently instructing your body to operate at this full speed critical action alert, well, they just might surprise you. So here is a partial list of traumas so that you can better understand the life consequences of living frozen in a state of instinctively driven fight and flight protection. So you can see how your history may have culminated into this state of fight and flight protection being activated within your body and driving your chronic conditions. Here's that list now. There are many things on this list that you may or may not have considered to be traumatic in the past. I would suggest you just pause this video now and read through this list and Ask yourself how these events may have been a part of your life's history. Now, let's explore an example of how an old trauma can re-engage the fight and flight instinctive mechanisms of the autonomic nervous system today, long after the threat is no longer real. So consider getting in a car wreck at an intersection on your way to work, and then reliving the experience of the accident, the fear, the anxiety, the stress, every time that you go through that intersection. Or as another example, think of how your body reacts just before you step in front of a big crowd to give an important speech. In both of these cases, most of us react in predictable patterns that include increased heart rate, blood pressure, shortness of breath, clammy hands, dry mouth, feeling like you have butterflies in your stomach, tension and stress or recurrence of pain patterns, the inability to focus or make decisions, clenched fists and tight jaw, digestive problems, including irritable bowel syndrome, and many others, avoidance behaviors, and emotional reactions, including anger, fear, anxiety, and depression. Now, how can all of these reactions be universal and predictable for all humans? It's because they represent the impact of the instinctive fight and flight responses of protection within the human body. And every time that these reactions become re-engaged, they're actually reinforced. And this results in the formation of life habits over time. Perhaps this picture best exemplifies how our brain reacts today when exposed to the memory of an old trauma. Even when we consciously understand the experience is not currently or directly threatening our lives today. Look at this picture for a minute and just think about how it makes you feel. You can probably remember what you were doing when this occurred, where you were, the people that were around you, the responses of those people, the looks on their faces. You probably have very good recollection of many events that were associated or surrounded by this event itself.
Okay, I think...
So now we can understand how trauma impacts our brain, how that resulting fight and flight.
All right, I think that's kind of enough to just, if you've never seen this video, to just kind of absorb, off the get-go, like, what's happening here? Okay, so you experience a trauma, and then, the default program or the autonomic nervous system just runs the trauma. It just keeps running it, and so all of your organs and your brain is shooting out adrenaline. And after a while, as the guy says, our body's not meant to sustain that. And so stuff basically, not only is the way we create our lives out of kilter, but we're always in panic mode, or we can go into panic mode very quickly over anything and nothing. And it's very easy. What I found is, what I call, you can reinfect the original trauma as well. So with hypnosis and putting yourself or your client in a soothing trance, we'll be able to speak to the mind and also the subconscious parts of ourselves, and to minimize this trauma and actually get the body to understand that the trauma is no longer happening. What happens is the body, as far as the background program and the subconscious goes, the body still believes it's happening, and or it can be reignited at any given time. And so we saw that list of things that we wouldn't normally associate, And then we have coping behaviors, coping mechanisms, and they just keep the whole mess in the air, so to speak. So that's my understanding of it now. And so a therapeutic approach to ending trauma, minimizing people with compounded PTSD syndrome and symptoms like myself, would be to, ease that type of pain and start creating a safe existence for the mind, body, spirit, and aura. And I do believe that eventually they're going to find a way to do it, but it's kind of cutting edge, pioneering stuff. And I don't really think that people understand how badly, at least in America and the world at large, how badly and deeply we need this type of therapists and therapy and therapists. So if you go and you like look at, say, you go here on YouTube and you look up trauma TED Talk, for instance. A TED Talk on, you'll get all of these, what trauma taught me about resilience. Let me see, the paradox of trauma. Understanding PTSD's effects on the brain. So why don't we have a little listen? We got about 6 minutes left.
Kind of what I feel like, and my subject is post-traumatic stress disorder, which I think I have today. So I'll start out with our poem. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. One moment, he's on the wall, eating a hamburger, drinking a beer, talking about the Friday night football game, and the next minute, he's a scrambled egg. His mind, his body, and his emotions are very different. So this is our active learning. I want you to look at the person to your right and to your left. And I want you to think, can you tell that this person has gone through some really traumatic event? Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. But the answer is probably no. Because we call it the hidden wound. I like to refer to it as the silent scream. Because it's very much in that person, but most of us can't see it, can't hear it, and can't feel it. But they can, and they're not going to talk about it. Now, I have been married to my husband for over 40 years. He's a Vietnam vet. I didn't know him before he went over, which is probably a good thing. On the other hand, I didn't know what normal looked like for him. So he arrived in country 3 weeks after his 21st birthday. He was one of the older ones. He was a second lieutenant. And on his first week there, he was sleeping in a tent with 2 other second lieutenants when a rocket exploded over their tent. 1 person was killed, 1 person lost an arm and a leg, and he was injured. But not bad enough to be sent back home. It's like, welcome to Vietnam. And after a few weeks, when he was healed enough, they sent him on his first mission, and that was out in the jungles of Vietnam, where he stayed.
We're going to have to start wrapping it up. This is Janet Sehorn,
experiencing tremendous high doses
about how
traumatic events that dealt with
affects the mind, the brain, and the body. But it's interesting to note, when you talk to people about PTSD, most of them think of a Vietnam vet or some kind of war vet or some kind of war situation. You know, it's a bad, like, Hollywood movie, and the person wakes up, usually a guy in the middle of the night, and has flashbacks and can't seem to process the memory and seeing all of his friends being shot or maybe somebody dead. And the fact of the matter is that type of PTSD is like, it's less than 5%. Most of the PTSD is growing up from in homes with parents that were addicts or some kind of accidents or repetitive trauma, sexual abuse and trauma, and you might have even completely blocked it out. So that's when you start to get in like a one event versus multi-dimensional PTSD, or I think my doctor calls it complex PTSD. So that's all of that. And I just don't think they know that much about it. And, you know, if you ask most people what PTSD is, they do have a basic idea of like, it's a Hollywood version. It's just like anything else. Like if you ask people, what does a modern witch look like? They've got a Hollywood version. Or what does a modern psychic look like? They've got a modern Hollywood version of what it is to be psychic, what a person looks like. And even a hypnotist. What is it, you know, the swinging watch, all these cliches. So thank God for YouTube. Helps us to, you know, kind of get rid of some of these cliches, but it's not really happening fast enough. But I really do believe the therapist of the future is going to have to understand multiple complex single event PTSD as well as do trauma recovery. But you just come and see me after summer's over because I am going to have a full certificate in this type of healing. So, my name is Kirk Kerber once again, and we've been watching In Deep Trance, my TV show. I've been here for 16 years, and we'll take you out with some soothing music. And if you'd like to have contact with me or write me a letter, you can go on over to my website at kirkspiritual.com, and it's been my honor to be your host and to discuss these issues with you. So, we will leave you with some very soothing YouTube video called The Legendary Elixir of Life, where hopefully you watch this and all of us will become immortal to outlive our PTSD and trauma. It's very soothing. I actually meditate to this every day. So, thanks for watching, guys. I will see you next week in the Cyber Temple here of Life in Studio 4, New York City. And you can write me an email at kirktv@gmail.com or check out my website, and I'm on all social media. Thank you for watching. Namaste.